On the afternoon of the 4th of October, 2010, Western Hungary was moving through what should have been an ordinary autumn day. In the industrial town of Ajka, a large alumina plant operated by MAL Hungarian Aluminium had been running for years, processing bauxite into alumina, the white powder used in aluminum production. Like many such plants, the refining process created an enormous waste product known as red mud, a thick, rust-colored residue left behind after bauxite is treated with caustic chemicals. This waste was stored in vast containment reservoirs outside the plant. Over time, these reservoirs became man-made lakes of alkaline sludge and liquid. One of them, known as Reservoir Number 10, held an immense volume of this material behind earthen embankments that rose over the surrounding land. To local residents in nearby villages such as Kolontar and Devastation, the reservoirs had become part of the landscape. Large, silent walls containing something few people thought about every day. Yet behind those walls sat a dangerous combination of industrial waste, water pressure, and structural risk. The summer of 2010 had been wetter than usual across parts of Central Europe. Rainfall had been heavy, and questions later emerged about whether water saturation, poor drainage, and structural weakness may have contributed to the disaster. At the time, however, nothing dramatic appeared visible to the public. Workers were on shift, machinery moved through routine cycles, and families in the surrounding villages were eating lunch, cleaning homes, tending gardens, or preparing for the school day to end. Children were returning home, elderly residents were indoors, and roads were lightly active with normal traffic. The villages nearest the reservoir were peaceful and exposed, built on low ground with no expectation that a toxic flood was about to descend on them. At approximately 12:25 p.m. local time, the northwestern corner of Reservoir Number 10 catastrophically failed. A section of the retaining wall gave way, and the contents of the reservoir suddenly burst outward. In seconds, the contained sludge transformed into a fast-moving wave. Around 1 million cubic meters of red mud slurry surged free. Eyewitnesses later described hearing a roar like thunder or an explosion. The first sign for many residents was not a warning siren or emergency announcement, but sound, an unnatural rushing force approaching at speed. Then came the sight, a wall of reddish-brown liquid mud racing across fields, roads, and directly into homes. The sludge wave, estimated in places at 1 to 2 meters deep, hit the village of Kolontar first because it lay closest to the failed reservoir. Houses were smashed open. Doors buckled inward. Cars were lifted, spun, or buried. People inside homes had almost no time to react. Some climbed onto furniture or upper floors. Others tried to run but were overtaken by the torrent. The mud was not ordinary earth and water. It was highly alkaline, carrying caustic chemicals capable of burning skin, eyes, and lungs. Anyone knocked down into it risked drowning, chemical burns, fractures, and shock at the same time. Streets disappeared under red sludge. Fences collapsed. Utility poles tilted. Domestic animals were swept away. Gardens, orchards, and livestock pens vanished beneath a thick corrosive coating. Witnesses later recalled seeing neighbors screaming for help from rooftops or trapped behind debris. Rescue was extraordinarily difficult because the sludge clung heavily to boots, vehicles, and equipment. Moving through it was like crossing wet cement mixed with chemicals. Some rescuers themselves suffered burns while trying to reach victims. From Kolontar, the flood continued onward into Devastation, a larger town several kilometers away. There too it invaded homes, businesses, roads, and public spaces. Residents who had not yet heard news of the breach suddenly found red sludge pouring down streets and into courtyards. Some were trapped inside houses as the material rose. Others fled carrying children or elderly relatives. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers. Confusion reigned because at first many did not understand what substance had arrived or how dangerous it was. People knew only that an industrial disaster had occurred and toxic mud was everywhere. Hospitals in the region quickly began receiving injured people. Many had chemical burns to their legs, arms, and faces. Others suffered broken bones from impacts or falls while escaping. Eyes exposed to the alkaline slurry required urgent flushing and treatment. Inhalation of dust and fumes later became an additional concern as the sludge dried. Medical staff had to manage trauma, contamination, burns, and panic simultaneously. Ambulances moved constantly between affected settlements and treatment centers. The death toll rose as search teams reached destroyed areas. Some victims had drowned in the sudden wave. Others were crushed by collapsing structures or swept into obstacles. Among the dead was a very young child, a detail that deeply shocked Hungary. In total, 10 people lost their lives, while hundreds were injured, many seriously. Entire families were displaced in minutes. As the first afternoon turned into evening, firefighters, police, soldiers, and disaster response teams moved into the region. Helicopters surveyed the damage from above. What they saw resembled a red inland sea spread across neighborhoods and farmland. Large swaths of land had been coated. Roads were impassable. Heavy equipment had to be brought in to clear channels, remove debris, and stabilize structures. Authorities ordered evacuations in the worst-hit zones, fearing additional failures in nearby reservoirs or contamination hazards. The environmental emergency widened almost immediately. The red sludge entered local waterways, including Torna Creek, then moved toward the Markal River system. Aquatic life in smaller streams was devastated as the highly alkaline waste altered water chemistry. Fish died in large numbers. Riverbanks were coated red. Authorities downstream feared contamination could spread into larger rivers and ultimately the Danube, one of Europe's most important waterways. Neighboring countries were notified through emergency systems as the plume advanced. Hungary's government declared a state of emergency in the affected counties. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán visited the disaster zone, where scenes of destruction were broadcast internationally. Images of residents standing outside ruined homes covered in red residue became symbols of industrial negligence and environmental vulnerability. Questions emerged immediately. How could such a reservoir fail? Were warning signs missed? Had inspections been inadequate? Was the company truthful about risks? Meanwhile, the practical work of survival continued. Temporary shelters were opened for displaced families. Volunteers arrived with food, clothing, bedding, and cleaning supplies. Soldiers helped build temporary barriers and direct traffic. Engineers examined remaining reservoir walls to determine whether other sections might collapse. Residents who returned briefly to homes often found interiors ruined, floors buried, furniture destroyed, family photographs stained red, appliances unusable, and a chemical smell lingering in the air. Cleanup became one of the largest post-industrial remediation efforts in Hungary's history. Tons of neutralizing agents such as gypsum and acids were used in affected waterways and soil to reduce alkalinity. Streets were scraped repeatedly. Contaminated topsoil was removed from gardens and fields. Houses too badly damaged or contaminated were demolished. In some places, entirely new housing areas had to be built for families who could not safely return. The dried mud created another hazard: fine dust. When wind lifted the particles, residents worried about inhalation and long-term exposure, so water spraying and dust suppression measures became routine. Scientists studied the red mud's composition and risks. While some feared severe heavy metal poisoning, experts found the immediate acute hazard was often the extreme alkalinity rather than exceptionally high dissolved heavy metal concentrations. That did not mean the spill was harmless. Chronic contamination, soil damage, ecosystem stress, and long-term land recovery remained serious concerns. Tens of square kilometers had been affected. Fields that once produced crops were rendered unusable until treated or excavated. In the months that followed, legal and political consequences intensified. Authorities seized documents and launched investigations into plant management, reservoir maintenance, and regulatory oversight. MAL Hungarian Aluminium denied wrongdoing early on, but public anger was intense. Survivors wanted accountability, compensation, and truthful answers. Engineers debated whether the failure stemmed from design flaws, foundation weakness, overtopping, seepage, poor monitoring, operational mismanagement, or a combination of factors. Like many industrial disasters, the final picture was complex rather than attributable to a single moment. Years later, criminal proceedings continued. Managers and employees were charged in connection with negligence and safety failures. Appeals and legal reversals extended the process, but eventually convictions were secured against multiple defendants connected to omissions and failures surrounding the reservoir's condition and operation. The physical scar also remained visible for years. Photographs from forests near the spill zone showed a distinct red line on tree trunks marking how high the toxic wave had reached. That line became a haunting reminder of the force released that afternoon. New homes replaced some lost neighborhoods, but memory could not be rebuilt so easily. Survivors remembered the sound first, the roar of something impossible arriving. Then the color. Then the realization that normal life had ended in less than a minute. The Ajka red mud disaster became one of Europe's most notorious industrial accidents of the 21st century. It exposed the hidden risks of waste storage systems that often sit quietly for decades until a single structural failure turns them into weapons against the communities below. It also demonstrated how environmental disasters are never only environmental. They are human disasters measured in funerals, burns, ruined homes, uprooted families, poisoned rivers, and trust permanently broken. On that October day in 2010, a wall failed in Ajka, but what truly collapsed was the illusion that industrial waste ponds are passive features of the landscape. Beneath their still surfaces can wait catastrophe.